Hi guys, I'm continuing in the series of revising mathematical problems for the exam of 2020. And today I'm going to start with a series related to functions. At some point I'll also get to the point of discussing just a little bit more broadly what a function is and what the notation is that can be used. This is quite important, I feel, for your further studies university, where if you're pursuing some kind of mathematical career, as engineering or even finance, it's important to understand this, and that certain functions can depend on more than one independent variable, and how you have to write that notation, and even more broadly, just what a function is. But we'll get to that later. I'm not going to even start with that, but I'm going to just start with this example. I want to get through this question. This is from 2018. As you can see over here, it's 23 marks, so it's already a lot. The big percentage of a paper. So if you can get this right, this is really good. So we're going to start with the first example. It's simple for these couple of examples in the sense that you have to solve for x. And off the bat, I want to note just a couple of things. I'm going to just start with this by saying that obviously it does not have to be x, right? So they could have said solve t, and then given this function as t squared equals 14 plus 3, right? So as soon as you see a different symbol, don't get a fright. This x is really just a variable, right? And it could have been t or z or anything. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say, well, when you look at this function then, the first thing you notice is this quadratic term here. And so you know that it's a parabola, right? Okay. This then gives you a clue to what you should find. So on the x-axis here, you have a t. This is the independent variable. But you know that solving for x, you have two solutions. So we know that no matter what we do here, we have to find two solutions. And it's because this is a parabola and it always crosses the x-axis at 2 points. Well, not always, but in these cases. And so it has two solutions. And the third thing I want to say right off the bat is you can do this by calculator, right? You can do this by inspection. And you can do this by the ABC formula. So those are the three things in your arsenal that you have to solve these quadratic equations. So let's get into it then. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first try, I always first try inspection. So let's see what we get. I hope that all of you know that to solve this quadratic formula, you can write it as the product of two brackets. Because it's a homogeneous equation, that equals to 0. Okay, so this is always a standard form in which you write it. And then you've got an x and an x here. Okay. Now you have to puzzle a bit to find the constants that have to come on the other side. So we know that factors of 3, well, what's factors of 3? 3 times 1 is 3, right? And that's about that. So your options for what has to be written here is very limited. We've got 3 and 1. Now the details of what symbols to use. Well, we know that it has to be plus 3. So it either can be plus plus or minus minus, right? But we know that this is minus. So in this case, for this example, we have minus minus. Okay, I'm always going to, in these examples, test it just to make you comfortable with it. And you can do this a good tip is to do this in the exam and in your head even, in a very quick way, just to double check yourself. Okay, so the way you test it is these two guys over here are multiplied with one another. So that leaves you x squared. So what I'm doing in the test, is I'm reversing this solution and I'm checking whether I get this initial problem, right? Okay, so I multiply the x's with one another. And the next step, I have to multiply this x with that 1. There's a lot of arrows going on here, so let me see if I can just erase some things here. There we go. So this x, make sure that everything's fine. It's in a highlighter. It needs to be in a pen, and I want it in blue. Okay, so this x, now that's exactly what I didn't want. Pen, blue, this x times that 1, and then this x times that 3, right? Those are the two middle operations you have to do. So it is x minus 1 is minus x, and 3 times x, or minus 3 times x, is minus 3x. And the final operation you have to do is this 3 minus 3, I should say, times minus 1, and that is plus 3. And this is all equal to 0. Okay, this is the very complete way of writing it. You always drag down this, don't get lazy, always drag down this, because this makes the equation true, equals to 0. Okay, I'm going to simplify this a bit. X squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So I know it's correct. And so my final solution, my final answer that I need to write down is x equals 3 or x equals 1. Okay, that's the solution. If you write that, you'll get 3 marks. Now I'm going to pause here a bit and just quickly explain this a bit better. And it's all got to do with this, right? So I know that x times something equals 0. And that something is got to be 0, right? So something, for example, x times 0 is always 0. So in writing my solutions to this equation, I know that the value in the first bracket has to either be 0 or the value in the second bracket has to be 0, right? So for this example, x minus 3 has to be 0, okay? Or x minus 1 has to be 0. And then it's just a case of taking 3 over, and there you get your solution. X equals 3 or x equals 1. But the reason for this solution is the fact that something in a bracket multiplied by 0 will always be 0. Okay? So that was the first example. I hope it's okay for you guys. And let's move on. There we go. Okay, and then the next example, they tell us that we need to calculate it correct to 2 decimal places. Already off the bat, you can sort of know that you're going to need to use the calculator, right? But to introduce you to the ABC formula. Now we're going to solve this equation using this formula, and in the end you can simplify the ABC formula using the calculator, right? Okay. Our starting point again, as we know, it's a parabola. Okay, so we know it has to have two solutions. Okay. I like to simplify the equation a bit. That makes my use of the ABC formula a little bit easier. This doesn't have to be done. It's simply my preference. I'm going to simplify this equation by dividing it by 5. And therefore, I get x squared minus 1x plus, well, 1 over 5, and that's 0.2. But I'm going to keep it 1 over 5, and that equals 0. Okay, so I've just simplified it. Fine. Now I'm going to write down the ABC formula. So, formally the ABC formula is written like this. X, because that's what I want to solve, x equals, well, minus b plus or minus, well, what's written here? B squared minus 4ac. Just complete the square, now the square root, over 2a. That's the ABC formula, right? And by inspection, you can see that you're going to get two solutions out of that, because you're going to get a plus 1 and a minus 1 for the other solution. Okay, now, generically, this equation is written as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So there you can see, in this example, the a is 1, the b is minus 1, and the c is 1/5 of 0.2. Okay, and now we just have to fill it all in. So x equals minus, well, minus 1, right? Plus or minus square root, and here I'm going to write minus 1 squared minus 4, a is 1, and c is 0.2 over 2, 0.2. Is that right? No, 2 times 1, and that's just 2. Does that look okay? Everyone's still with me? So we've got 1 plus or minus 1 minus, and 4 times 0.2. Well, to me, that is 0.08. Right? 0.8, sorry. Okay, so we have 1 plus or minus, and this is 2, sorry. The square root of 0.2, because that's what's left if you minus 1 minus 0.8 over 2. And then you'll get x equals 1 plus square root of 0.2 divided by 2, or x equals 1 minus the square root of 0.2 divided by 2. You can go and double check that. And as I said, you'll probably need the calculator to calculate the square root, right? And make sure to give this answer to 2 decimal places, because that's exactly what they're asking. And that's again worth 3 marks. Fine. Moving on swiftly. Now we get to an interesting one. because we can see this is a parabola. But what we have here is something very interesting. We have this larger than sign. Okay. And what that means is that they want the solution to this x where the value of the parabola is larger than 0. Well, if we draw this, and again on the x-axis we happen to have x, and we have a parabola here that looks something like this. This is not correct to scale or anything, it's just purely for illustrative purposes. What they're saying is, we know that there's two solutions here, that's fine. But more strongly what they're saying is, well, I'm only interested in these solutions where the parabola is larger than 0. So only for this part I'm interested in the solution, and not at all for this part. Okay. Now you might be saying, well, the roots are these 2 points, and that is true. But because we have a larger than sign here, we're going to have a solution where the roots are going to be incorporated also with either larger or smaller than signs. And so we have to know which part, to interpret that correctly, we have to know which part of the graph they're interested in. And they're interested in the part of the graph that's larger than 0. So it's this positive y-axis, for argument's sake. Okay. Okay, so that was the first hint, and the second part is just very plain as we've been doing it all along. So let's write this out correctly. We know that it's going to be the product of 2 brackets, and correctly writing this again now, this is larger than 0. We know that x has to be there, and there has to be some kind of number in there, right? Now when we think about this a bit, we know that factors of 10 are, well, 10 times 1 and 5 times 2, right? And if we look at 5 times 2, well, we can subtract these in some way to obtain 3. So I'm very tempted to write 5 and 2 here, and then we can go and puzzle out what the symbols have to be, right? So we have to have a minus 10. This means that we'll have to have a plus in the one and a minus in the other one, right? And how that sort of pans out is we'll have to have because we have a negative 3, we'll have to have a minus 5 and a plus 2. And I've written doing completely crazy there, because that's what happens sometimes, but okay, a plus 2. Okay, we're gonna, again, as I said in these videos, I'm gonna test that, but in the exam you just do this in your head to be quick. So we have x times x is x squared, then x times 2 is plus 2x, this x times minus 5 is minus 5x, and minus 5 times 2 is minus 10, larger than 0. We have, simplifying this, x squared minus 3x minus 10 larger than 0, and lo and behold, this is kind of cool. We're happy with this. Okay, now we have to interpret this, and we're interpreting it on the hand of what I explained here in the beginning, right? So if I have to fill in values here on this graph, I know that this is minus 2, okay, and this is 5, okay. Now take into account what the graph looks like here. And then I can interpret it, well, the graph goes into the positive only for values that are smaller than -2. Okay, so on this side here, x smaller than -2, or, well, for this 5 over here, this graph is only positive for values larger, see, larger than 5. So x is larger than 5. Those are your two solutions. There's a slight little catch of 3 marks, but again, you've just got to figure out that there's a bigger S sign or a smaller S sign. You quickly think about this and you draw this in your head, and this is really going to help you interpret this solution that you obtain over here. Because obtaining this solution is fine, but you've still got to write down the values for x. And that's much easier if you have the graph in mind.